Okay, so let's just get to it. I believe this is session 11. Okay, I could be wrong, but I think it's session 11. All right, we're still in chapter 2, and the name of this section is The Altar of God. All right, and now let's remember that as this work progresses, the writing gets better, so to speak, if you're an English teacher, all right? Or if you appreciate, better and higher forms of writing. The writing gets better, but the poetry gets better and more fluent, all right? More fluid, let's say. But even though this is the early parts of the book, Jesus is using metaphors, all right? It's a poetic device, metaphors that, and you'll see what we mean. But when he speaks of the altar of God, all right, he's not talking about an altar. He's going to be talking about the mind. Okay, that's one use of the device known as a metaphor. All right, and we'll see that Jesus is going to using language, all right, first of all, and then he's going to be using what we have other things that we've made, such as the body, to help us to wake up, all right? So what we have miscreated, so to speak, Jesus, Holy Spirit, they use to help us along, to bring us back to the awareness that we never left the mind that thought of us, all right? We never left the mind of God, all right? We never left our original source. So let's look at section 3, the altar of God. The atonement can only be accepted within you by releasing the inner light. Right. Since the separation, defenses have been used almost entirely to defend against the atonement and thus maintain the separation. This is generally seen as a need to protect the body. The many body fantasies in which minds engage arise from the distorted belief that the body can be used as a means for attaining atonement. Perceiving the body as a temple is only the first step in correcting this distortion, because it alters only part of it. It does recognize that atonement in physical terms is impossible. The next step, however, is to realize that a temple is not a structure at all. Its true holiness lies at the inner altar, around which the structure is built. The emphasis on beautiful structures is a sign of the fear of atonement and an unwillingness to reach the altar itself. The real beauty of the temple cannot be seen with the physical eye. Spiritual sight, on the other hand, cannot see the structure at all, because it is perfect vision. It can, however, see the altar with perfect clarity. Okay, so the atonement, which is the correction principle, which is the correction of the belief that I separated from my source, I separated from God. So the atonement is that correction. It can only be accepted within you by releasing the inner light. All right. It's by contacting that inner part of your mind, what sometimes Jesus refers to as the stately calm within. Right. And in other forms of study, they're called the present moment. The acceptance of presence, that's releasing the inner light. It's discarding all the distractions of the world and of the body, right? All the distractions of the senses. Right? I'm not saying deny those things. We're just saying, you can from time to time you can put them down, put them aside, until you realize that they are just distractions. And sooner or later you're able to just discard them totally. I used to like, and the word is used here in the course, and I like the word. It's called relinquish. All right? And when I was in high school studying second year Latin, Caesar's Gallic Wars, whoa, all right? He would use the word relinquo, right? When his armies were on the move, they would relinquish. They would just pick things up and move on. But what they didn't need anymore, what was just not useful anymore, they would relinquish. It meant to just put it down and walk away from it. Just leave it there. Okay? They relinquished it. And that's what we will practice doing for the rest of our lives if we care to. You know, is noticing what's meaningful and what's meaningless. And we can relinquish the meaningless without resentment, without, the sense of loss, sacrifice, without anger, without judgment. We just relinquish it. So I don't need that anymore. I can put it down and walk away. Okay? So, since the separation, defenses have been used almost entirely to defend against the atonement and thus maintain the separation. Right? Now, I think last time I said we speak more about defenses. This is where that's coming into play, I guess. Because everything in this ego system, everything in this world, in this universe, all right, is actually a defense against the truth. It's a defense against the atonement, so to speak. It's a defense against the realization of what you really are. All right? It's all that. It's a defense against that. Oh, I don't want to know that. I don't want to know who I really am. Right? Because my ego says I'm going to disappear. I'm going to die. I'm going to become useless. I'm not going to know where I am. All right? Whatever fear pops up into your mind. But everything is really a defense against the knowledge of who we really are, right? And we don't have to judge ourselves for it. We just have to notice that, be aware of it. Say, oh yeah, I'm doing that again, okay? All right? And notice that, sooner or later you're going to say, I don't want that anymore. I don't want to do that. I don't need that defense against the truth, right? And, notice big defenses. The body is a big defense against the truth of who you are, because the body takes up so much of our thought processes, right? It takes up so much of our day, so much of our activities are just all around the body. Like a few months ago, I usually use this example, a few months ago, people went to vote. And if you come down to it, even voting is helping you protect yourself, helping you protect your body when it comes down to it, right? So it's all about taking care of this structure here, okay? And we get distracted with that, and we think this is it. This is the end-all, be-all. And living in this world is the end-all, be-all, right? Unless you're an existential philosopher, then you get fed up with the whole thing. But that's what most of us think. This is the end-all and be-all. This is it. Isn't that great? All right? Isn't that great? Now, Jesus is going to use our living here, our experiences here and our experiences with the body as a means of bringing us to that inner light so we can release that inner light and realize just who exactly we are. All right? So, before I get too far afield, all right, so he says in sentence 2, since the separation, defenses have been used almost entirely to defend against the atonement and thus maintain the separation. Right? Ego wants to maintain itself. Right? ego really doesn't know anything other than its existence, but it feels weakened. It just feels like it's losing power when we start to go toward the light. And we'll see later on, so the ego, kicks up a little bit. All right. So it defends against the atonement and thus maintain the separation. This is generally seen as a need to protect the body, all right, because that's the biggest distraction. All right. The many body fantasies in which minds engage arise from the distorted belief that the body can be used as a means for attaining atonement. All right, in quotes with a small a. All right, and even you see in many cultures, and it's not just the the Western Christian religions, that the idea that you did something wrong and there's some God or something, some power out there that needs to be appeased. And so there's the concept of sacrifice, and what usually gets sacrificed is the body, and that was that doesn't really need that much explanation. There are just many cultures that think, well, the ground is not fertile. We have to sacrifice a body. Boom, because that'll make the fertility gods happy. And it even in the works its way all the way up to the 20th century, where we still think that the body needs to suffer in some way, has to be deprived of something in some way, in order for God to like us. In order for God to say, okay, you can come in. You suffered enough. All right. But this course here is. One of the big messages of this course is that sacrifice is unnecessary. Right? Suffering is unnecessary. Right? I believe in this section he's going to say it can be useful, and we'll see how useful or what use it can be. All right, let's just move on before I keep talking. All right. So it's a distorted belief that the body can be used as a means for attaining atonement. Perceiving the body as a temple is only the first step in correcting this distortion, because it alters only a part of it. So, all of a sudden we get, I believe it was say in the 60s, it started as a movement of, getting fit, and your body's a temple, take care of it. Don't beat it up. Right? Don't, just don't do silly things to it. There's no need to sacrifice. It didn't stop everybody from doing that, but still there's the seed of the idea was your body's a temple. Respect it. Respect yourself. And he says, but that only alters a part of the situation. All right? It does recognize that atonement in physical terms is impossible. The next step, however, is to realize that a temple is not a structure at all. Right? So the next step is to realize that the temple is not, the body's a temple. No, the temple, it's not really a structure. Right? This is where the metaphors start coming in hot and heavy. All right? The next step, however, is to realize that a temple is not a structure at all. Its true holiness lies at the inner altar, around which the structure is built. So, all right, its true holiness lies at the inner altar. Right? Jesus is referring to the mind. Right? Now, he's not talking about the brain. Sometimes when I say the mind, I go like this, but the mind is not encased in anything. Although he's giving us the idea that perhaps it is, but the temple is not a structure, and the beauty of it all is the inner altar, right? The mind, right? That is around which the structure is built. The emphasis on beautiful structures is a sign of the fear of atonement and an unwillingness to reach the altar itself. And let's just say that. The emphasis on the structure, even if we take it literally and we say, wow, look at that cathedral, look at that church, even if the church is just little and quaint and old, right? Or it's a magnificent Gothic structure, look how beautiful that is. You can get caught up in the structure and forget that this little chapel over here, which has its beauty and its quaintness, and it's so old, and it was out there in the wilderness for so long, and you get caught up in that structure, and you realize it's leading us to the same thing that the great Gothic cathedral is. We get caught up in the structures, and we forget that these are places that are designated for us to come and commune with our Creator, commune with that part of our mind that is boundless, all right? The inner light, all right? And we can get caught up in the structure. I was even reading a little quote by, they attribute it to Thich Nhat Hanh, and I have no reason to doubt that. And it's, it's like a beautiful Zen garden path, right? With these beautiful rounded stones, walking through the pond and into the wonderful lush jungle or garden, whatever, just beautiful. And it reminds us that you can get distracted by the beauty of the path. You can be distracted by the path, okay? And, that's on a very deep level. That's the ego thought system saying, no, we don't want to go near the truth, all right? We don't want this all to disappear, right? We want to hold on to this, so we don't want to go near the truth. Once again, if somebody knows different, I think it might have been Descartes who said that Jesus came to point the way, and people began to worship his finger. Okay? Just getting distracted by the structure, getting distracted by the form. Okay? And since this is a psychological spirituality, Jesus is pointing out that that's it's a psychological defense that happens very quickly until we start to notice, oh, that's what's happening here, all right? Until we start to pick up on our thoughts, all right? And we could say, oh, that's right, I fell in love with the structure. I fell in love with the path, right? And because I don't want to get to the end too soon. I don't want to release that inner light, right, which will give me the awareness of my position in heaven, so to speak. All right, so we can get stuck on the form, okay, and that's defense against the truth, as we say. There's a lot of things that are defense against the truth, all right? So, like he says, the emphasis on beautiful structures is a sign of the fear of the atonement and an unwillingness to reach the altar itself, the mind. The real beauty of the temple cannot be seen with the physical eye. Right? So the real beauty of heaven, so to speak, right? The real beauty of the milieu of our existence can't be seen except with that visual eye, with that spiritual eye, right? Touching into that present moment, that reality of what is, right? The reality of all it is, right? But spiritual sight, on the other hand, cannot see the structure at all because it is perfect vision. It can, however, see the altar with perfect clarity. So the spiritual sight doesn't see the physical world, the bodies, the temples, all that. It just goes right toward the beauty of the mind that was created by God, by the original source. Right? The spiritual eye just touches right into that, and that's what it sees. Okay. All right. The spiritual sight can see the mind where we exist with God. Okay. Paragraph 2. For perfect effectiveness, the atonement belongs at the center of the inner altar, where it undoes the separation and restores the wholeness of the mind. Before the separation, the mind was invulnerable to fear, because fear did not exist. Both the separation and fear are miscreations that must be undone for the restoration of the temple and for the opening of the altar to receive the atonement. This heals the separation by placing within you the one effective defense against all separation thoughts and making you perfectly invulnerable. All right? So, what does that mean? Okay. So for perfect effectiveness, all right, the atonement, the correction principle, the thought that you never separated from God, belongs at the center of the inner altar. We go to that stately calm within, and there's that realization that I never separated from God. All right? So that belongs at the center of the inner altar, where it undoes the separation, and it restores the wholeness of the mind. So it restores the split mind. The mind was split when we entertained that tiny mad idea, the silly idea that I could be separated from my source. The mind split, now I have a choice. I have to make a choice. All right? And that continues until we heal that and make the mind whole. Okay? All right. And it's not somewhere down the road. It doesn't have to be. It can be sooner than you think. All right. So it restores the wholeness of the mind. And before the separation, okay, he says before the separation, the mind was invulnerable to fear. Before that thought came into mind, it says, oh, maybe I can be separate from God. I think I'll try that. Then all of a sudden, fear exists in the mind because, oh, God, I did something wrong. I destroyed the oneness. Now, the author of oneness is going to come and get me. All right? I have to get out of here. All right? And so fear comes into play with the thought of separation. All right? But he says, before that, fear didn't exist. All right? So both the separation and fear are miscreations that must be undone for the restoration of the temple and for the opening of the altar to receive the atonement. All right? So how do we undo these things? By recognizing, all right? Recognizing when I'm using the ego as my guide, when I'm using the ego as my filter to interpret the world. All right? And we can stop at any moment during our day and ask ourselves, what filter am I using? What guide am I using to interpret what's going on in front of me? Right? I mean, I could be driving back to my apartment after dropping my wife off at work, which I do sometimes. All right? My wonderful wife, Jean. Okay, I have to mention her. She's the light on my path. Okay? She keeps me on the straight and narrow. Okay? But I'm driving home, and I notice my mind is wandering now. I'm looking for the guilty party. Who's not obeying the traffic laws? Who's cutting me off? Who's stopping in the middle of traffic just to unload or pick up a passenger? Who's doing this and who's doing that? And, who's trying to bully me by beeping the horns, and all of a sudden, I mean, that becomes the classroom. It becomes a classroom. They say, oh, wait a second, what teacher am I listening to here? Right? I'm listening to my ego. How do I know that? Because I'm not just being, looking for the guilty party. I'm actually afraid. I'm afraid I'm going to get into an accident. I'm afraid I'm going to get hurt. I'm afraid I'm going to hurt somebody else. I'm going to get a ticket. All these things that could happen in the course of the 5-mile drive from where my wife works to where I live, where we live. Let's put it that way. Okay, it's not just me. It's me and Jean and the cat. But that's how quickly things happen. That's why, Jesus said to Helen, you're much too tolerant of mind wandering. So on my way home, my mind is wandering. And it wanders into, as Jesus said, it takes the detour into fear. Right? It wanders into the ego world. Right? Until I realize it. And I say, oh, I don't want that anymore. I don't want that. So this is what he means by undoing. You're undoing the fear, right? It becomes a practice. First you have to notice that you're fearful, It's like the first step in many 12-step programs is to realize you have a problem. All right? Okay, so I'm afraid. I don't want to be afraid. Right? I don't want to mask that fear with irritability and anger. I don't want that anymore, right? And so I ask for help. Help me to see correctly. All right? Help me to see the correction. All right? Help me to see that help me to see through the filter that says you're not separated from your source. You are always connected and communing with God. All right? You're always surrounded by spirit. You are spirit. Help me to look at things through that filter. All right? Help me to enter this classroom and invite that teacher into it. All right? Okay. That's my little driving instruction for the day. So, where was I before I so rudely interrupted myself here? So, before the separation, the mind was invulnerable to fear because fear did not exist. Both the separation and the fear are miscreations that must be undone for the restoration of the temple and for the opening of the altar to receive the atonement. So we practice undoing these things. First, notice, oh, I'm fearful. Help me to see correctly. I'm undoing. And you take these little steps until you have this wonderful advance, all right? And you have this aha moment, okay? That effectively encourages you to get more of that, to have more aha moments, and longer and stronger ones. Okay. So this heals the separation by placing within you the one effective defense against all separation thoughts and making you perfectly invulnerable. So it heals the separation thought, the thought that makes me think that I'm angry at the drivers who are not obeying the rules, who are threatening me, right? Physically threatening me. Right? This heals that. Right? It reminds me on a very deep level, everything's okay, Kev. All right? Just go about your driving. You know how to do that. Pay attention, and you're okay with whatever happens that way. As we mentioned some time ago. Right? That thought comes up, it's okay. Whatever happens, you can be peaceful. Right? So, paragraph 3. The acceptance of the atonement by everyone is only a matter of time. All right, think about that. The correction of the thought of separation is only a matter of time. And that thought being corrected in everyone's mind. Right? This may appear to contradict free will because of the inevitability of the final decision, but this is not so. You can temporize, right? You can stretch things out for a long time, and you are capable of enormous procrastination. But you cannot depart entirely from your Creator, who set the limits on your ability to miscreate. All imprisoned will engenders a situation which, in the extreme, becomes altogether intolerable. Tolerance for pain may be high, but it is not without limit. Eventually, everyone begins to recognize, however dimly, that there must be a better way. And this recognition becomes more firmly established, and it becomes a turning point. This ultimately reawakens spiritual vision, simultaneously weakening the investment in physical sight. The alternating investment in the two levels of perception is usually experienced as conflict, which can become very acute, but the outcome is as certain as God. All right? This is a very nice paragraph, okay? He says, you can temporize things, all right? You can stretch things out, you can plan, whatever. And he says, and you are capable of enormous procrastination, right? Oh, I think I'll study the course today. No, first I'll have a cup of coffee, then I have to, and then I get distracted. Oh, I should do the wash instead, really, because it's piling up, and then this and that, and I'll do that tomorrow. I'll study the course tomorrow, and then you forget about it. Whatever it is, right? You don't have to study the course. Okay, I'm just using that in my own personal example. All right, and so I'm capable of enormous procrastination. Believe me, he's talking right to me here. But you cannot depart entirely from your Creator. All right, you can put it off, you can delay, but you can't depart entirely from your Creator. You cannot leave the mind that thought of you. All right? You can sit there going, no, I can't hear you. What? All right? But sooner or later, you're going to listen. You're going to hear. All right? And because the Creator set limits on our ability to miscreate. And one of the limits on our ability to miscreate is that memory we brought with us into the dream, so to speak. The memory of who we are, the memory of where we exist, the memory of our relationship with our Creator. That is in the altar, that is in the mind. And in words, in metaphors, we use the term Holy Spirit. That is the memory of who we are. We have brought the Holy Spirit with us into this dream. All right? And we use the symbol, the form, the metaphor of Jesus as the manifestation of that memory. Jesus is that memory in form in our dream. All right? So those are, and they help us to set limits on our ability to miscreate. All right? Now when he says an imprisoned will, he's talking about in the ego thought system. The will is really imprisoned because it's actually, it comes down to you or me. It's a dog-eat-dog world. It's terrible. You know, we have to struggle, fight for our existence, really. Right? So he says that becomes, in the extreme, it becomes altogether intolerable. It's like, what am I doing here? You know, every day is a struggle. Well, every day I struggle, or every day is boring. That's a struggle. You know? Or every day is meaningless to the existentialists out there. And that becomes intolerable. It becomes an intolerable existence. And so then Jesus reminds us, he goes, look, your tolerance for pain is very high, all right? But it is not without a limit. Sooner or later you go, oh my God, all right? Everyone begins to recognize, however dimly, that there must be a better way. There must be a better way of existing. There must be a better way of looking at my life, looking at my relationships. All right? There has to be a better way. And he says, as this recognition becomes more firmly established, all right, so as we realize, yeah, there has to be a better way, and I'm going to go find it. So it becomes more firmly established after it's, just a little dim bulb. But it does become more firmly established. It becomes a turning point. Right? There comes a time when each person, and no matter how many lifetimes it takes, as for those of us who believe in reincarnation in all different lifetimes, sooner or later there comes that turning point. It becomes a turning point. This ultimately reawakens spiritual vision. There's got to be a better way. And something clicks. Right? And it simultaneously weakens the investment in physical sight. So, I'm no longer fully invested in the ego thought system, in the ego world, in the world of form. Right? I'm no longer fully invested. I'm starting to question it. Right? I say, who made that rule? Who made this? Who says I have to do that? All right. So it becomes a weakening in the investment in physical sight. The alternating investment in the two levels of perception is usually experienced as conflict, which can become very acute. So that becomes our, spiritual struggle, so to speak, because we do wander back into the world. We do get stuck in traffic, right? We do get stuck in the world, and then we pull ourselves back and say, "Oh wait, there has to be a better way of seeing this, of interpreting this." And he says, and so it seems as though we fluctuate. All right, so and that becomes experienced as conflict, and he says that sometimes that becomes very acute. It can be. We have to make a decision here. What am I going to do? He says, but he's telling us, I'm telling you, hang in there. He says, because the outcome is as certain as God. It's like he said just a little while ago. Sooner or later, everyone will accept the correction. Everyone will accept the atonement. Sooner or later, all pieces of the mind of God will accept the fact that they're never separated from God. He says the outcome is as certain as God is. All right. Spiritual vision, in paragraph 4, spiritual vision literally cannot see error and merely looks for atonement. So the spiritual vision, it sees past our little passion plays here. Right? It just sees that we're all connected. We're all part of the mind of God. Right? So spiritual vision literally cannot see error and merely looks for atonement. All solutions the physical eye seeks dissolve. Spiritual vision looks within and recognizes immediately that the altar has been defiled and needs to be repaired and protected. Perfectly aware of the right defense, it passes over all others, looking past error to truth. Because of the strength of its vision, it brings the mind into its service. This reestablishes the power of the mind and makes it increasingly unable to tolerate delay, realizing that it only adds unnecessary pain. As a result, the mind becomes increasingly sensitive to what it would once have regarded as very minor intrusions of discomfort. All right? So what he's saying, when that spiritual vision is awakened, right, it's sooner or later all the solutions that the ego comes up with, right, all solutions of the physical eye dissolve, right, because it all blends into what we continue to say is that there's one problem and one solution. The problem is, I believe I separated from my source. The solution is the atonement, the correction. You never separated, right? So all my many perceived problems, where I have many perceived different solutions, all ego solutions, all solutions from the physical eye, right? They dissolve because they're not that important anymore, right? And what becomes more and more important is my connection to my source, right? And then he says you become more sensitive because things that you would have thought were just little minor disturbances to your peace of mind, right? You become increasingly sensitive to what it would once have regarded as very minor intrusions of discomfort. Right? So we become more sensitive to when we're straying into the ego thought system. You can feel yourself moving that way. And you say, well, no, wait a second. I want to exist in that peace. I want to exist in that inner light. Right? And with the practice of noticing I've drifted and I want to come back, help me to see correctly. Right? Asking that, contacting the memory of who we are, the Holy Spirit, contacting Jesus as a friend, as a brother, as a guide. Help me to see this situation correctly, please. I don't want the ego solution. I don't want the solution of the physical eye. I want the spiritual eye. Right? And he says sooner or later you start to notice when you're drifting out of that serenity, as we say in some circles. All right? You start to notice, oh, wait a second, let me get back there. It's like we used to drive cars that were out of alignment. I don't know if anybody knows what that is anymore. But if your car needed alignment, if you let your hands off the wheel, it would drift over into the lane, left or right, and you would have to bring it back into the lane, right? And eventually your tires wear out. But you got to keep, and that's what we have to do with the ego mind. We keep drifting in, bring it back. Say, no, I don't want that. I don't want that. Help me to see correctly, please. All right? So, and Jesus reassures us. He says that in paragraph 5, he says, the children of God are entitled to the perfect comfort that comes from perfect trust. All right? Until they achieve this, they waste themselves and their true creative powers on useless attempts to make themselves more comfortable by inappropriate means. But the real means are already provided and do not involve any effort at all on their part. The atonement is the only gift that is worthy of being offered at the altar of God because of the value of the altar itself. It was created perfect and is entirely worthy of receiving perfection. God and his creations are completely dependent on each other. He depends on them because he created them perfect. He gave them his peace so they could not be shaken and could not be deceived. Whenever you are afraid, you are deceived, and your mind cannot serve the Holy Spirit. This starves you by denying you your daily bread. God is lonely without his sons, and they are lonely without him. They must learn to look upon the world as a means of healing the separation. The atonement is the guarantee that they will ultimately succeed. All right? All of us will ultimately succeed in healing the separation from our Father, our Creator. All right? And believe me, Jesus is being very poetic when he says that God is lonely without his sons. All right? And his sons are lonely without him. All right, we, as creatures of the earth here in this experience, we do experience loneliness. All right? But he's using that as a metaphor. All right? A very poetic scene that God is lonely, waiting for you to come home, or waiting for you to realize that you are home, waiting for you to wake up. All right? But and later on he'll say, God has tears and all that. But as I say, we're using words to paint pictures. All right? And so he says, look, you're entitled to perfect comfort. All right? You're entitled to that, to perfect comfort. Think of that. All right? And that comes from perfect trust. Right? Trusting that you are at home. You are at home with God. You're at home with your Creator and Source. All right? And until we achieve that perfect comfort, we'll run around trying to be comfortable in the world, in form, making the body comfortable. Right? Even making our emotions comfortable. All right? He says you're entitled to that perfect comfort. All right. So, let's see. Well, that should do it for this section. All right. And just remember the practice is to, when you feel yourself drifting, feel yourself having a reaction to something, all right, you can say, help me to see this correctly. All right. And by that, you're going into the altar. All right. You go to the altar and you ask Jesus to help you to release that inner light. The inner light that will shine on everything and give you a different perspective, all right, and help you to walk down the street and drive in traffic with a big smile on your face, okay? All righty then. Thank you, and thanks for being here. Message me if you feel like it. Ask questions, whatever you want to say is good, and I'll talk to you real soon. All right, bye-bye.